So yeah, kind of took the thunder away from me there, Eric. Telling me what I'm talking about. It's all good. So yeah, this is the continuation of the Summer Blend series, and unfortunately, the person who asked this question is not here right now. She's at home with a fever, but hopefully she'll get to hear it and listen to it later. So yeah, we're talking about the question of where did God come from? Who created God? Was He created? Why is it? What is this about eternity and God? The connection. What's the connection there? And so, really, it's really hard because when you open up a subject like that, you can go so many different ways. Like it has so many implications to it. Of God, either did somebody create God, or has he just existed from time past? There's so many ways and so many directions you can go with that. But specifically today, after answering and talking about this topic, we're going to talk about the implications of that. Exactly what Toria and Ellie were saying up here about the worship and honor due to God because of that. So obviously, we're getting a little closer to fall. I'm great. And to be honest with you, I'm really ready for fall to come. I've never been a summer person. I've always loved fall, winter, spring, and especially because fall also means football season. I'm excited about it, and there was something about being up here in Philadelphia during the playoffs and the Super Bowl last year. To never live in a huge city like Philadelphia and to move up here in the first year and kind of experience all the fanfare and stuff that was happening with that, it was really an unreal experience, and I'm really excited to see what happens this year. But the funny thing about sports fanfare is it actually reveals the nature of human belief and hope, doesn't it? And what I mean, to show what I mean, I'm going to make a statement to you, and I want you to pay attention to your reaction to it as I'm saying it. So, and here's the statement. I believe that this year, the Philadelphia Eagles will make it to the Super Bowl again. I think you're with me this far. But I think that they will play the Cleveland Browns. Now, even for those of you who don't know football, let me explain this statement I just made. I imagine that most of you were in agreement with the first part of what I said, was that the Eagles are going to the Super Bowl again this year. And I think there's a few reasons you might actually believe this. First of that being, they actually made it there this year, right? They were just there a few months ago, and not only were they there, they won it. So you can believe that they'd make it there again this year simply because of the fact they just were there a few months ago. In addition to that, I think a lot of you people, these Philadelphians up here, would believe they would make it up here, make it again, because you have a bias toward this team, don't you? Not only do you think they'll make it because of what they've done, you actually want them to make it there every year. So this year is really no different from any other. You expect them to make it there because you're a Philadelphia Eagle fan. Another thing is that the same players, the same coaches who were there this last year, they didn't leave. They're still here. Most of them are still here. So you expect the same people who did that feat last year can do it again this year. But I want to transfer that second part of the statement, that I said that the Eagles would play the Cleveland Browns. Again, if you don't know anything about the NFL, let me put the statement into context. Every NFL team plays a total of 16 games a year. So for the last 2 years, 2 seasons, the Cleveland Browns have won 1 game out of 32. So you see the ridiculousness of my statement starting to come out a little bit. So if I'm to make the statement that the Browns are making it to the Super Bowl this year, I'm not basing it off of anything but bias and hype. I think either I'm a hopeless fan, I just think my team's going to make it there, finally they're going to get there this year. There's not really much reason for me to base it on, I just think they're going to do it. Other than that, it should be said that the Browns this year have actually made a lot of big changes with their players and stuff. So anybody who knows the game of football think, oh yeah, they can really make a run at it this year. They can really do something different. And while that's true, to say that they will make it all the way to a Super Bowl is a very overhyped claim, is it not? For those of you who know about it. And it's usually those with the most bias that actually make the most noise with hype, isn't that true? So, now I'm going to actually kind of change that statement a little bit. If I had said that I believe the Philadelphia Eagles would play Patriots again this year, I think that statement changes a little bit because most of you, I think most of you may not disagree with me that they would make it again this year, but most of you probably cringe a little bit when I say that because I'm right, but you don't want me to be right on that. So here's the unfortunate truth is that most of these same ideas that we arrive to with how we think about our football teams is actually the same way we arrive to ideas of how we think about God. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of bias that's involved with what we believe about God or believe about ourselves. There's a lot of it. We don't always trust in reason or in past action to root what we've actually believed in God. There's a very good example of this in Romans 1, where the Apostle Paul highlights how the people of his time, and even long before them, were subject to God's judgment because they suppressed the truth about God's existence and other of his attributes. So let's start in verse 18 of Romans 1. It should be up there, I believe. Yes. The wrath of God, that was loud. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people, who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for things made to look like a mortal human being, and birds, and animals, and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is praised forever. Amen. So what should be noted here is that Paul states that God offers a clear revelation of his existence and nature. Look again in verse 19 and 20. It says, since what may have been known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have clearly been seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So what Paul's discussing here is God's eternal existence, his power, and his sovereignty over his creation, especially his independence of it. God is not a part of creation, nor was he ever created. However, he exists independently of it and has no reliance upon it. However, creation itself does have its reliance upon God. A couple other verses that talk about this is starting Nehemiah 9:6. You alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all their starry host. The earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them, you give life to everything. And the multitudes of heaven worship you. And then again in Psalm 92, we read this. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And so these group of verses, including Romans 1, Nehemiah, Psalm, they all bring us back to this topic of who created God. If God is what created creation, then who created God? And now this question is actually very logical. I don't think there's any shame in considering it and even looking for an answer and expecting an answer. So after all, does not our experience tell us that everything that we see in existence has a beginning? And that the beginning usually begins with either a process, a choice, or a combination of both, does it not? Think about when a child, even a child can notice this when they come up to their parents, and we haven't gotten this question yet, but it will come and say, where do babies come from? Think about what's happening there. The child we're talking about is now seeing a baby where there once was not a baby. This baby just kind of came out of nowhere, so where did it come from? The same question, this is the same thing when we ask, where did God come from? Who created God? For me, the answer is actually really simple, but it's profound. For me, it's one of the biggest reasons I believe in the existence of God, even outside of the truth claims and reliability of the Bible. This, for me, is one of the reasons I believe that God does exist. So I want to spend a little time working this out before we come back to the verses. So consider what it is I just said. I said that everything in existence has a beginning that is a result of a process, a choice, or a combination of both. You with me so far? So take, for instance, the school building. The school building is created using a combination of bricks, wood, glass, paint, tile, all these things. And people brought them together to make what we call the building. Now, you can continue breaking down this building, like I said, into trees, wood, metal, bricks. You can break down even those trees and bricks even into smaller parts that make up that tree. And what you begin to see, just think about even us. We survive off of eating plants and animals. Those plants and animals survive off of eating other plants and animals. And so what you begin to see is a pattern forming. It always seems you can trace the source of a natural object back to either another natural object or some process that started it. And so the implications of this, and this is really where you really start to see how this makes sense, is because physical matter, like this podium, cannot explain its own existence. Two ways. This podium cannot will itself into existence, meaning that it can't just choose. There's not a spirit that's inside this podium that just said, I'm going to make myself today, I'm going to exist today. At the same time, you can always, like I just mentioned, break this podium down into different things that make it up. So there's a never-ending process of cause and effect that happens in creation and in nature. So this is very similar to the question of what came first, the chicken or the egg. You guys have heard that, right? So, and it can seem confusing, and we'll touch a little bit more on that phrase in just a moment. But for something to begin to exist in time and space, and to begin in time and space, a personal, which means willing in this sense, being outside of time and space had to will that something into existence. And we'll clarify this a little bit in a moment. So, talking about that cycle, the natural cycle we were just talking about, it seems like if you wanted to, you can kind of trace that cycle just back into an eternal past. But let's consider our chicken and egg explanation for a second ago. If you start following the process of chicken, egg, and it seems like you could possibly go backwards just into eternity following the process of chicken and egg, right? However, and I know we're not in school right now, mathematically speaking, an infinite or eternal past actually isn't possible. It can't exist. So that process of chicken, egg into eternity can actually happen. Now, to clarify, this is different than saying, an infinite number of things from one point forward can happen. That's what they call a potential infinite. Basically, if I was born April 20th, 1992, and I lived for eternity, that's possible. We can conceive that. However, to say that I lived from eternity past as a physical being is impossible. Let's apply this to something even greater than a chicken. Let's apply it to the size of our great universe, right? It's the same concept. It's still a physical manifestation of matter. It's actually quite well accepted in scientific communities that the universe actually wasn't eternal at all. People who are scientists know that the universe is not eternal. One of the biggest reasons they know this is because they can tell that the universe, the planets, the space that's out in space, forgive the pun, is literally expanding constantly outward. And if something expands outward, then reason tells us that it once came from a certain point. And this is what they call the Big Bang. However, in order to avoid the divine implications of the universe having a beginning, a lot of them actually try to push that the beginning was created by nothing. That literally nothing created everything that we see in existence. And that's nothing short of a miracle in itself. And as you can see, that the aspect of everything coming from nothing is not reasonable. It's not. So we come to this point. If the matter in the universe and the matter within it is not eternal, then what created it? What was this, quote, first cause that brought about time, that brought about space and matter at the beginning? And so these are the implications of what the creation of physical matter caused. It had to be created by something that was immaterial, which means it wasn't made of something physical. And we know God is not a physical body, He's a spirit, He's an intelligence. Second, like I said, it had to be immaterial because matter, space, and time are interdependent with one another. You can't have a rock without having somewhere to put it or a wind to put it. Does that make sense? You can't have time if there wasn't space in which to measure something moving or being in time. This cause also had to be personal, meaning that it can choose to act, or else time, space, matter, it never would have come into existence. It would have just been nothing. Something had to act upon the nothing to create something. And so it's this uncaused first cause that we actually consider to be God. No matter the religion, what we cause to be God, or this cause is God. And now I know that seems like a lot of work just to come full circle and say that the answer we're looking for about who created God was nothing. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to say just to say that. It almost seems so simple that it seems wrong or a little cheating a little bit. But again, before we move on, what are the alternatives? Either the universe and the matter within it is eternal, which is not reasonable, like we just briefly looked at. Or the universe just created itself out of nothing, which is even more unreasonable to me. Or, as we're beginning to see, and so talking about those, we're beginning to see what Paul is referring to as the suppression of God's eternal truth and his divine attributes. Because all that I've described here are the beliefs that people of our age used to justify not believing in the existence of God. So coming back to Romans 1, we see that what's implied in God's eternal existence and his creation of the universe is his rightful, authoritative ownership of it and the worship deserved from such a status like that. Not only does God own the universe, he created it specifically for his glory as a sort of throne through which to show his majesty. Let's start in verse 20 again. And I think you should have that, Gracie. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and his divine nature have clearly been seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Excuse me. And again, we see this in 1 Chronicles 29:11. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. Indeed, everything that is in the heavens and the earth, yours is the dominion, O Lord. You exalt yourself as head over all. So moving on to the passage, what we're seeing implied in the passage is that God is holding these people in Romans accountable to something. For it says, they are without excuse. So God holds the people at fault for something, but what is it? What is the sin that he's holding them accountable for? That he's not giving them an excuse. What then is our sin at its core? Let's look at the passage again in verse 18, and then we're going to skip ahead to verse 21. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the ungodliness, or godlessness, and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. And what is the truth? That God is the creator and sustainer of the universe, as well as the rightful object of worship. Starting again in verse 21, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings and birds, or animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshiped and served created things rather than Creator, who is forever praised. Do you want to know what mine and yours greatest sin really is? It's unbelief. And it's not one from ignorance, but it's a choice. That's what God is saying there. He's like, people are without excuse to not believe in me because I've revealed myself to them. So our greatest sin is unbelief, and it's one that comes from choice. What the passage is saying is that God, all people all over the world can clearly see God's attributes. They've been revealed clearly to us. And we can give thanks to him because he provides things for us, because he's actually given us life and provides and sustains our life. We can give him thanks for that. The passage here says that we don't. We choose not to. This is really what sin is. And even though the source of it is unbelief, it obviously manifests itself in a variety of ways. Obviously, you got lying, cheating, sexual impurity, thievery, selfishness, but all that stems from unbelief. Now, for us, most of us, this isn't an unbelief that tells us God doesn't exist. For most of us, it says, I think most of us here are here in church because, in some level, we believe God exists. I think that's a given. No, I think the unbelief that most of our sins result from is the belief that would tell us God isn't worthy enough of our praise. He's not worthy enough of the honor he's owned for us to give it to him. I think even more so as Christians, those of us who are Christians, the sin and unbelief that we have isn't that he not exists, but that we don't believe he's actually powerful enough or trustworthy enough to believe that he's going to provide things that we need, either for our physical being or for our spiritual life. So instead, just like the rest of the world, we'll go out and cheat and steal and manipulate to get what we want, or even obsessed over what we don't have. I think materialism, even for me, I'm noticing, is something I don't catch myself doing until I'm in the middle of it, really. And really, when I find myself there, I'm realizing why I got there. I'm not putting a certain amount of trust or a certain amount of joy to God because I'm looking for some sort of fulfillment in things that I can get and buy. And so this is what sin is, when our innate need to worship is not satisfied with God the Creator, and we instead turn to worship that which He created. Sometimes it may just be ourselves, but it's just the subject of our worship is not God. Look at the verse where it says, we did not give thanks to God and exchange His truth for a lie and worship creation rather than the Creator. Think back to Adam and Eve at the fruit. When they ate the fruit in Eden, they weren't simply eating the wrong fruit. They didn't just make a bad choice and forget what they were supposed to do. If you look at it, they took a step toward idolatry when they considered the possibility of being like God as more important to them than obeying Him and not eating the fruit that they did. So when this passage says that God is revealing His wrath against all unrighteousness and all wickedness, this is what He means. This is the unrighteousness and the wickedness He's talking about. Our world has long been storing up for itself the wrath, and we've been a part of accumulating that wrath for ourselves, all of us here. It's one thing to say the people out there, but when you start looking inward and you see where your own idols and your own things that you worship take the place of God, you see why and how we've added to that. But soon, and God's been patient. He's been very patient. I don't know how long exactly people have been on the earth. I mean, if you're conservative, it's at least 6,000 years or so. That's a lot of people, and a lot of sin to kind of come through and distort it. God's been very patient. However, the time of God's patience will end. That's when He'll come back and He'll reclaim the glory that we've refused Him by righteously judging us who have given our worship to others. He'll end our rebellion by cleansing and purging the world with fire. And we fully deserve that wrath. We fully deserve the wrath mentioned in the passage. It will eventually come on the world. But, and you can skip to the next verse on that. But God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through Him. Whoever believes in Him is not condemned, but whoever does believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the Holy Son of God. All of us, I think most of us, have heard at least that first part of the Scripture. If you're not a Christian, you know what that Scripture is. It's John 3:16. In the passage of Romans, it talks about just how deep and what it is that God is going to uncover His wrath about. However, I want you to understand what we just read in John right there. It says, do you understand that even though you still deserve every ounce of wrath, that your idolatry and your worship of material, of yourself, of other gods that aren't even really gods, you still deserve God's wrath for that, because of His love for you, He's made a way to be forgiven. He created us with a purpose. I will go back to the very beginning of what He said. Everything is created for a purpose. He did not create it just to destroy it. He gave it a certain purpose, and it was our choices that thwarted that twisted that. And so when God punishes sin, it's not just that He's raining down a judgment as a judge because we broke some arbitrary law. We twisted creation, and His judgment of that is making that right. But when Jesus, God Himself in the flesh, came down, He offered Himself up in line with God's will as a substitute for me and you, so that we didn't have to drink the cup of God's wrath. So we didn't have to actually be corrected and destroyed because of our sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says this, so God made Him who knew no sin to be sin for us, so that in Him we might become the righteousness of God. So Ellie, Tori, you guys can come back up as we're closing. I want you to think back to the idea we discussed at the beginning. The idea that reason, past action, bias, and height really heavily influence what we believe. We discussed briefly, for the most part, how we as people really do suppress God's existence. There's not a good reason for it. The Bible itself suggests there's no excuse for it. Science even is in behind it. Everything we know came from somewhere. I think that's not even the hardest point, the hardest thing to believe, and I think most of us here are leaders in this church, so we know who we've had this experience with Jesus that we know He saved us. However, there's a thing about the gospel and a thing about our hearts that consistently tell us to just trust in what Jesus did for us. And so I just want you to ask yourself questions as we leave. I want you to think about why you truly believe what you do about God and about yourself. Why is it that you believe that? Do you believe in God simply because as a kid you were told you were supposed to? It's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't give you any reason to trust Him. Have you actually had an experience with God and the truthfulness of His Word for yourself? Do you give yourself the benefit of doubt because of how good you are, because of the bias you have towards yourself? Do you kind of just excuse yourself because you're really not that bad of a person? And all these are just things we tell ourselves, and they affect how we believe, what we believe, and how we react toward God. And so if there's something to leave you with, as a Christian, for those of you Christian, I really do want you to understand the depth of God's love for you. Don't let it go so as far as you accept yourself. Sometimes what we believe about ourselves and how we perceive other people see us limits how much we understand God actually loves us. And I want you to question why people would tell you not to trust in Jesus Christ. I want to tell you to question why they would tell you to believe God isn't real or He hates you. And obviously we are limited by time here, but anybody who's read the Word can stand up here for hours and teach you and show you the promises God's made for you, that Jesus made for you, and the implications of those. So I'm going to implore you to go back and look for those promises and to believe them. Because when you believe in Jesus, you're not simply believing that He existed. You're believing what He said about you. What He did actually accomplish what He said it was coming to accomplish. Yeah. So that's what I want to leave you with. Discount anything that would fight for your attention and make you believe God either doesn't exist or He doesn't love you. Go and trust what He said about you and let that influence and impact the rest of your life. I want to pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you so much for the fact that you are true and you stay true, even when we change and we convince ourselves of things that are untrue. That you're constantly seeking after us, and you said if we would come seek you, we would find you. That you made a way to see you in nature and in everything around us, to know that you are God. You created us. You created all that we need. Forgive us of not returning that thanks to you. Lord, as we leave here, help us understand how deep, how serious sin is, how serious it is in us, but also how serious your love is for us and what you did on the cross and what you did through resurrecting and destroying death. We thank you for your word here, and we look forward to hearing more over the coming weeks. And we ask that we leave here with your word changing us, making us different and more like your Son than when we came in. Thank you for this opportunity to worship you and love you.